Welcome everyone to the Resilient Yantic River Public Workshop number 2. We're here tonight to present kind of an overview of the project to date. This is the kind of conclusion of the current phase of the project. So we're going to walk through what we've been doing to think about how we can be more resilient to flooding along the Yantic River corridor, the different projects that we evaluated and approaches that were considered, and then kind of where we landed with the next kind of most feasible projects that do have a flood mitigation benefit. We're going to go through some introductions, then we're going to talk about the evaluated options, some kind of comparison across different flood mitigation options, dam removal in particular, channel widening in particular, managed retreat after channel widening, and then we have a brief discussion. So my name is Helen Zincavage. I'm with the Southeastern Connecticut Council of Governments, and we have several project partners that all came together to provide their expertise as we considered flood mitigation options. We have our partners at the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation. Our municipal partners, that's the city of Norwich and the town of Bozrah and Franklin, were also involved in this process. GZA and Stantec are our project engineers. So what are we all trying to achieve here? So really, we've known that the Yantic River has floods and floods frequently for some time now. But the most recent event that really brought this into focus was the flooding that occurred in January of 2024. And, we all experienced locally what happened that day. So that really brought municipal leaders together. And when we consider that experience along with what's happened throughout our time of living near the Yantic, we know that there's properties, roadways, and critical infrastructure that are located close to the Yantic and in the floodplain, that this river has a large watershed, and Norwich's downstream position within that watershed really leaves it vulnerable to flooding. The river corridor's topography also plays a role in flood risk, and then various barriers to water movement that have been established over time, like dams or bridge crossings. So all of that added together really adds up to flood risk that has to be addressed in order to protect life and property. And really just we want to emphasize that development has been occurring along this corridor for many, many decades, centuries. And for a long time, we needed to develop near rivers. That's why we see so many historical river developments. You see mills, you see dams, but rivers really powered industry, and so we can understand why development occurred along these kind of vital waterways. However, today that development is posing a problem because what was once really, quite useful and necessary is really problematic. We see here on the image on the right, this is a map of the properties that experience repeated flood losses in the whole southeastern Connecticut region. And we can really see that Norwich is that inland hotspot right here along the Yantic River, where we're just seeing, repeated need to rehabilitate homes or businesses after flooding. So how can we address this issue? The project process for the past about a year and a half was to brainstorm and evaluate actions that could reduce flood risk to people and property along the Yantic River, to assess current and future flood conditions, because right now flood conditions are a bit of a moving target. We have the current 100-year flood, but with climate change, or rainfall is coming in more frequent, intense events. And so we want to make sure we understand current and future flood risk conditions and highlight their relative flood risk along the Yantic corridor. Not everywhere on the corridor is equally at risk from flooding. We wanted to engage with the community around the feasibility and effectiveness of different flood mitigation measures and start to gauge some preferences, and then ultimately develop 3 concept designs for specific flood mitigation projects. And this will really set the city and the team up to pursue funding for the next phase of some projects, especially design and implementation. The project was also guided by a steering committee, which had leadership and staff from City of Norwich, Town of Bozrah, Town of Franklin, and then different regional entities and local entities. So Norwich Public Utilities, Norwich Community Development Corporation, UCFS, USDA and NRCS, federal representatives from Senators Blumenthal and Murphy's office, state agencies including Demis and Deep, Hartford Healthcare, and the Nature Conservancy all contributed during the course of this project. So if you're following along here in the room or later at home, we wanted to consider a couple of questions at the outset here. I'm going to turn it over to David from Stantec to guide us through this next process.
Great, thanks, Helen. So the first question we have on a survey that we're going to pull up now is we're looking to get to know the audience here. So we share this. So here's a link that you can use to access the survey. It's a Mentimeter. And so you can either enter the code in by navigating to menti.com, or you can use your phone and use the QR code. So let's give 1 second for anybody in the room. Okay, so the first question we want to ask is if you live or work in the Yantic area. So you can select both. So this is a live poll. Feel free to fill it out.
No service.
Oh,
Yeah, there's no
sorry.
service
Okay.
here.
Okay. Well, next we'll go, what the question would be is getting to know how people have been impacted by flooding in the area. So we'd be looking to understand if people were personally impacted by the flooding, if their homes or businesses were physically damaged, if they experienced lost revenue or suffered business disruptions, or if they haven't been directly impacted. So really looking to get to know, who's responding here. Okay, so let's shift back to the presentation. Okay, so now we'll speak about some of the options that we evaluated as part of this project. So for context, here we have a map showing existing conditions. This shows the 100-year or 1% annual chance flood. You can see on the map that the Norwich Town Commons experienced quite a lot of flooding in a 1% annual chance flood, and many of the neighborhoods along the Yantic River as well. It's approximately 0 to 3 feet of flooding for many of the areas, including the commons. And so this is an 100-year storm. This would be stronger than what was experienced in January 2024. And then on this slide, you could see what a 500-year or 0.2% annual chance flood would mean for the community here. And so it's more serious magnitude here at the commons. You might expect 9 to 12 feet of flooding at the commons and along many other areas adjacent to the river. And so this really presented the urgency of needing to evaluate options. So here are several options that we evaluated in great detail coming out of our first public workshop. And so ones that we identified for quite a bit of study include a removal of a dam, the Upper Falls Dam, which could reduce upstream flood levels. We also looked at channel widening specifically next to the commons. We looked towards structural flood protection, such as berms, levees, and walls. And we also looked at the idea of a voluntary relocation program. Other alternatives that we considered but didn't go into as much detail include building interventions. So think flood proofing, dry or wet flood proofing, installation of sump pumps, and other measures that could protect homes and businesses. We looked at widening of bridges and culverts, which can, in some cases, be very expensive. We did look at dredging, but as you can see on this diagram in the bottom left, the volume of water that's expected in a flood condition here far exceeds the volume of water that you'd be able to store here from dredging. And then we looked at watershed scale improvements. And so on the right, you'll see an image of a map showing upper watershed storage, where it looks at assessed properties upstream and what can be done here. So next, we'll discuss some of the options in greater detail. And what we found is that the dam removal, the channel widening, and a potential voluntary acquisition of property program were the most promising in terms of impact. So we evaluated the alternatives on a number of factors. We looked at flood risk reduction. We looked at the anticipated cost of implementation. We looked at how long those solutions would be expected to last, how easy they would be to maintain, their environmental impacts, and then availability of funding sources. So you can see the green colors are better, and then the darker purple are worse. And so the dam removal, the channel widening, and managed retreat really end up performing better according to these different dimensions. And so now I'll hand it over to go into more detail about the dam removal. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Wayne Cobley from GCA. I'm going to talk to you now about the dam removal option at the Upper Falls Mill Dam. So this is a dam, number one, that's owned by the city of Norwich. So that gives us a little bit of control over the solution, being that it's not privately owned dam. This is a city-owned dam. And it stores water by design. We've estimated at 72 acre-feet of water. 72 acre-feet is just like what it sounds. It's an acre of land with 1 foot of water over it. So picture in your mind 72 acres of land and 1 foot of water. I've calculated that's about 2.5 million gallons of water. So that's what this dam is holding back. There's sediment and there's potential contaminants in the sediment will have to be sampled and investigated. And then there's going to be a permitting process with the state of Connecticut's Department of Energy Environmental Protection and the Dam Safety Group to design a decommissioning process that would be safe, effective, and beneficial to the environment. What makes this dam option likely for flooding, for funding, is that the dam is in poor condition. And the state and the federal funding sources do allow for the grants to be used to take dams that are in poor condition and remove them to improve the environmental conditions. You cannot find funding to actually improve the dam and maintain it. So that would be a responsibility of the city if we were to keep this dam. And there's a cost to that, but there would not be able to apply for additional funding from the state and federal government. Next slide. So we made a rendering of what that area of the river would look like when the dam is removed. This allows the water flow through this river corridor. All the water that's stored behind the dam is now free to move through the river area. And if we look at the next slide, you can see kind of a depiction of an overhead view of what conditions we have today at the dam. When you look up gradient from the dam, where that Yantic Dam Trail is, that's the water that's being stored because of the dam. And there's an existing mill structure that was for the dam operation that's on the riverbank. And this water all leads to the Upper Falls Park area, which was just recently improved by the city. And there's a spillway that was designed to take the overflow water from this dam area and move it along should the water exceed the dam's capacity. But as the dam deteriorates, the chance of overtopping of the dam would increase. So that's one of the reasons why we picked this alternative. You look at the next slide. This is a proposed concept plan for what the area could be when we take the dam out. So now that the dam has been removed, we have the river shoreline that's going to be, the alignment's gonna change. We can have a walking trail. We can use the materials from the structures and the dam itself for fill material for an overlook structure at the dam. So you're trying to reuse those materials as opposed to trying to take them off site and needing to either dispose of them or use them for salvage somewhere else. So we're gonna try to reuse the materials as much as possible, restore the shoreline, create some shaded areas, continue the park area use of the riverbank there. And you know, there's an estimated fill amount of 700 cubic yards of material that would come out of removal of the dam. Okay, so now let's look at the benefits, because to apply for state and federal funding for these, they're gonna wanna see that the benefits of the dam removal exceed the costs of removing that infrastructure. So number one, we no longer have the safety hazard of this dam falling apart, having water overtop it, potential damages to the roadway infrastructure. We also no longer have any maintenance and repair costs for the city to take on as the dam needs further repairs. The offset of the downstream flood impacts are created by the widening that occurs on the river. And the improvements on the river banks that we would do with tree plantings and vegetation would have ecological benefits. And if the project is constructed in a way that can get the permit approvals and the funding approvals, then we can go both to the state of Connecticut for funding as well as the federal government. Right now, FEMA has funding available for dam removals, and so does NOAA. Thanks. Okay, so our next step with this option is to complete a design for the decommissioning project. So we have a concept coming out of this project, and we have a preliminary benefit cost analysis. But what we'd be asking the funding for is to finish the design, finish the permitting process, and show the feasibility and the benefit costs of doing the project. The design phase and the permitting phase would be what the project funding would be requested for initially. And then with the outcome of that design phase, we'd apply for additional funding to implement the design. There'll be a bid package document that SECOG can put together to obtain the design engineering firm, and also the benefit cost analysis that we're doing for this project would be enhanced with the design analysis that we do in the next stage. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the next option that we're going to review is the channel widening of the Yantic River. And this is showing us the current conditions of the Yantic River. What we're looking at here is the Norwich Town Commons area up in the distance. And you can see there's a lot of vegetation and growth on the riverbank. If we widen this area on the side where the Norwich Town Commons area is, we can allow more of that water that's been coming now from the upstream project to move through this area. A wider river means that there'll be more water stored before that riverbank is overtopped. We've estimated the maximum flood depths are 1 to 3 feet on Town Street, 2 to 5 feet across the Norwich Town Commons area. We've also modeled this area for the 100-year flood event, current day flood event, and we've also looked at whether this flood reduction from the river widening improves the mitigation of flooding on both sides of the river. I'll be showing you a picture of that in the next slide. Okay, so looking at this, this is the current condition and the current width of the river. You can see the building, that's the Norwich Town Commons Mall area and the parking lot area. You can also see the buildings on the north side of the river. Now we'll show you with the river widening to begin, where we'd be moving that river bank. We'd be taking up some of the parking places on the Norwich Town Commons, and that widening would continue all the way to when we get to the Connecticut DOT controlled land at the Route 2 highway. So that would be the limit of the project from bridge, the new
one in Turnpike.
Town Turnpike, I'm trying to read upside down there, and the Route 2 overpass there. Which is off of the property from the Norwich Town Commons. Now we'll look at what the concept might look like. So rather than having a hardscape parking lot on Norwich Town Commons, you'd have a softscape, you'd have vegetation, some shading, and you also have some improvements to the riverbank structure itself. And what you're looking at there in the dark blue hatched area is the floodway area. And what you're seeing now with the wider river is that the areas that will be flooded in the future with the 1% or 100-year flood will be reduced in depth from what they are in the present day condition. There's going to be a need to address pedestrian traffic over that bridge area there, so we've shown that. And we're also showing replacing some of the parking in the community or waterfront access area at the top of the drawing there. The estimated parking reduction is 19%, and by giving up those parking spaces, we'd be allowing the floodplain to increase and the riverbank area to increase. So let's look at the next slide. And now, with the existing channel width of 90 feet, this is what we have today. Next slide will show you what will be increased to, and what the rendering of the riverbank over by Norwich Town Commons now will look like. So this is now a walkway area. It's going to have some stormwater storage. We're going to have increased canopy to reduce the heat island effect. And you're going to have a gradual slope to the river. Just looking at the benefits of this project, two main points. The 1% annual chance storm is, we are seeing an effective improvement on the flood risk being reduced. But when you look at the 500-year storm, or the 0.2% annual chance flood, you're not seeing a significant reduction in the flood plain as a result of the widening. So looking at the benefit and the cost analysis of this, we will be applying the benefits to this 1% storm. But when we look at the future, the 1% or 100-year flood today would be more like the 500-year flood, say 20, 30 years from now. So this would be a flood mitigation step that would improve things for the short term, but will not have a big effect on the most severe flood that might hit this area. The next steps for this is to take it from a concept into a feasibility study. We have to obviously talk with the property owner, let them understand what this would mean for their property. We'd also have to deal with the other stakeholders in the area, especially Connecticut DOT. And what we would be trying to do is come up with a more detailed design and a more accurate estimate of what the project cost and the project schedule might be. We present this as a plan and then apply for state or federal grant funding to take this particular project further. The grant funding that's available for this type of project will be contingent on showing that there's not a negative environmental impact doing this widening of the river.
And I just want to add one more thing before we move on to managed retreat, but really to emphasize that the channel widening, that whole concept, really something that came from the community. I believe it was raised by city staff at a meeting. And also then was raised by a member of the public that got us thinking about it when she was talking about some of the debris that tends to get caught under a bridge that leads from Town Street into the Commons Plaza. So again, just really want to stress that this one came to us from the community, and we're very grateful for the idea, and that it really did show some flood reduction benefits.
I take blame for that. I did suggest it because when Adam Winstanley, this is Mayor Nystrom, redeveloped it as Norwich Town Commons, he reduced the square foot 60,000 square feet of retail was removed from the original structure. That in itself has created more surface area for flooding, not in buildings, but around them. But I contend the spaces that were designed are no longer needed at the number this just doesn't exist anymore. So it doesn't mean I like it, but it does have some logic behind it.
Okay, so my name is John Trzynski. I'm with the CIRCA team, which is one of the project partners on this study. So the third concept that we evaluated and found had some feasibility and quite a bit of benefit in terms of reducing the flood risk is something called managed retreat. And the reason why we thought this was going to continue to be a part of the puzzle is because, you know, we found that there are some projects that can reduce flood risk along the Yantic River. However, there's going to remain several structures, areas, properties that are going to continue to see flooding in the future and potentially pretty severe flood risk. And so there is going to be a need to sort of evaluate this option. So what is managed retreat? You know, basically managed retreat is when a property owner makes a decision that they don't want to deal with the issue of flooding in their property anymore. They don't want to continue to have to pay for rebuilding and continue to deal with the stress of the potential flood risk, the safety issues, all of that. So the property owner makes a decision that they want to relocate to somewhere that is higher ground with less flood risk. So where the community part of it comes in, where the managed part of the retreat comes in is, so the property owner makes that decision. The community works with the property owner. So the city would work with the property owner to basically obtain state or federal funding for a buyout. And, you know, it's basically the idea that once the property is acquired and bought out, the person relocates to somewhere safer. And the structures on the old property are demolished and the areas turned into open space in perpetuity, to be open space for flooding. So that's the general concept. And, you know, it's not without its challenges, some of which are, you know, the process is, there's a few different programs that can fund this type of a program. The most common is FEMA, through various programs. They'll do acquisitions where they pay for this type of thing. So you know, the process involves basically doing an analysis of the property, the value of the property. They come up with a fair market price prior to a natural disaster for similar types of property. Just like if you were to get a mortgage and you were to go to get an appraisal of a property, they do an appraisal of the property, and that's what they will fund. You know, it takes time, so it's not the quickest type of transaction. But it has been done in Connecticut, and we think that this is a potential solution for some areas along the Yantic. Next slide. So how does it work? I kind of talked through this a little bit. The first step is to really understand the interest and, the potential interest from property owners through direct outreach, most likely having that conversation. Then, in most of the programs, including FEMA, the city has to be the applicant for this type of funding situation. So the city would then be the applicant to a federal agency, or in some cases, the state, to get funding to buy out the property. A big piece of the puzzle is, where do people go? And one of the downsides for the city is obviously, if there are commercial properties that are leaving the area, that's a loss of commercial property tax revenue. And so the tax revenue loss for the city is not insignificant. And so it makes sense to do this in such a way that you can try to find relocation areas within the city and within the corridor where you can maintain those services, and people can relocate within Norwich town even. And then if everybody's on board with it, we have a project, we go after grant funding. The implementation is basically, the demolition of the structures and restoring the land to some sort of a floodplain state. It could be a park, could be wetlands, but the development would not be allowed in the future. Next slide. So the benefits, it's a long-term solution because you're removing the property from the floodplain. And so there is a high benefit from that standpoint. There's also obviously a lot of public safety issues for some areas along the river. If it is done in sort of the context of looking at the future of the community and thinking about redevelopment, it could potentially align with other types of goals that the city has articulated in the POCD, like, doing infill in certain areas. Are there commercial areas that are underutilized, that could be redeveloped? Things like that. So there are many potential benefits. Next slide. Okay, so this, in general, what the team did was look at this area of Norwich town. And this concept plan basically assumes that the dam removal and the channel widening take place. Following that, there's going to still be a number of properties, 28 properties in this area, that will continue to have some level of flood risk. So the next step really is to do an evaluation of each of these properties, and figure out, in some cases, maybe the flood risk is manageable enough that you could elevate some of the properties or do flood proofing. In some cases, those options might not be available due to the depth and the velocity and the severity of flooding, in which case those properties we think should be prioritized. And so what we've done here is create 3 categories. And the first category is priority area 1. Those are the structures that are outlined in red. Priority area 2 is the yellow, and priority area 3 is the green. If you want to go to the next slide. So basically, priority area 1, these are structures that are in the FEMA regulatory floodway. So the floodway is basically something that when FEMA develops these maps, they do a hydraulic model. They figure out where is the channel of the river. And the channel is basically, or the floodway part of the channel, is the area that is required to convey floodwaters during a flood. So if you were to think about it as a highway or a road, if you were to sort of think about the river as a road or a highway, that all that water is traveling, the floodway is the middle of the road, or at least within the road. And so it's the place that is the most has the most significant danger for people because the floodwaters are traveling at the highest velocities. And we saw some pretty tragic examples of that this summer in Texas, where some of those areas were built or developed in floodways and, they face significant flash flood risk. So for that reason, we've just delineated basically the structures that are in the current floodway on the FEMA map here as priority area 1 have that conversation with the property owners and see if they're interested in pursuing this strategy of managed retreat. Yeah, next slide. Priority area 2 are the yellow structures here. These are structures that are going to remain in the special flood hazard area, the 1% or 100-year flood after the channel widening. So it's possible that these also could be interested in doing an acquisition and a buyout. And so we've labeled these here as priority area 2. The third priority area, which was the green on the previous map, these are areas that are in the current 500-year floodplain. And, so these are areas that you could do possible elevations or certain types of floodproofing measures. Might also be a good idea for those property owners to get flood insurance, for instance, because they're not likely required to have flood insurance in the same way that the properties in the 100-year floodplain are. But they're certainly going to face flood risk in the future. So we added those as priority area 3. Okay, so the next steps for the city and the community to pursue this is to really think about this question of where do property owners relocate to? And this might look different in terms of commercial properties versus residential. But we think that the next step would really be to do an analysis and develop an economic development plan that looks at how to keep businesses in this area by taking advantage of underutilized sites, areas that maybe could be redeveloped. And so that step of analysis of where potential commercial property owners could go, we think is a critical next step. And I mentioned, this kind of works with some of the ideas that are in the POCD, like brownfield redevelopment and infill development. Next slide. Okay. The other thing is, in some cases, the property owners might not be ready to take this step, but if you start having the conversation now, then in the event that there is a federally declared natural disaster, and presumably there would be federal resources available, that might be the time in which property owners are ready to move on. And, you've already started to have that conversation with some of these property owners. And you might have sort of the building blocks of these applications ready to go in that case. So we think that's another piece. And we mentioned it here, some states actually have state buyout programs, such as New Jersey. We don't yet have a program like that in Connecticut, but that's something we can advocate for going forward.
Thanks. So I think we'll skip the survey because we have some cell signal issues here. But next we'll close out with some open discussion.
Thank you to everyone for going through all that technical information. And so then, when we consider these different concept designs that have been developed, if you're following along at home or here in the room tonight, got a few questions that might just get you thinking and expressing some of your impressions about these concepts, from your initial impressions, or if there are particular elements of the designs that you find most effective, or if you're particularly worried about any of the design concepts that might raise concerns for you, whether those stem from environmental concerns. What will this look like on the ground visually? What's the cost? Will this be disruptive? And then some designs might reflect your priorities and values more than others. So, prioritizing safety or sustainability or general aesthetics. And if you have any suggestions for improving or combining elements from these concept designs, we'd love to hear that as well. So we'll just open it up now for general comment or discussion.
Um. Thank you very much. Again, Pete Nystrom. I support the concepts that were listed in green initially, the removal of the Upper Falls Dam. But having lived through the flooding of '82, when I was a younger person on a city council back then, we didn't remove that Upper Falls Dam, and it did fill back in, and I think we would be gaining even greater benefit with dredging added with the removal of the dam. Now, the dam itself coming out may start leading to some of that fill that's built into there by the new bridge, which also was elevated 1.5 feet in height. So that has been accomplished. You may start to see some of that flow at high water times on its own without any dredging. That has been surmised. The only other thing I would share is on Monday night, we're being asked to support a rather large revenue bond of $150 million. 84 million of that is the removal of the substation that sits in the Yantic's path in Norwich town. And that's over the next 10 years. And they're not all going to be done all at once. There's a number of other projects, but that's the big ticket item in the discussions that have happened and taken place following that flooding back then in 24. I do believe have led to that decision by the commissioners of NPU to support that. They're asking the council to take the next step to authorize it. That doesn't mean it can begin. It still has to go through all the regulatory processes on an individual basis. There's a half dozen or so projects on that list for potential revenue from that. That's the biggest one. And it still has to go through all the local approvals as well. They go to tomorrow. Mondays doesn't go to commission our city plan, but anything else would. Isn't that right, Deanna?
It depends on projects going forward.
Anyway, so that's kind of in the works, and I think that has been born out of all these discussions, so I'd say thank you. But I'm still worried about the cost with everything else going on. Thank you. I don't know anybody else, Deanna? Hi, come on. You're better at this than me.
I think all three concepts are great. The first one that you had, which was the, I think it's the dredging, right? The first one, that removing of the dam. I think that's important. The city's been talking about that for a while. Bringing it back into its natural state is always a great thing too. I think it'll be helpful, not as impactful as others, I think, but I think it needs to get done. The widening of the river in the area by the shopping center. It's gonna be a big lift to get that done as far as getting all the partners on board to do that. But I love the concept that you came up with in the green space that it creates and so how it will look when it's not flooding. I think that's great with the trees. And I think that will definitely help that shopping center and the buildings around it by doing that. And I think the last concept that you had was the what's the last one? It was my brain. So what the
Managed retreat.
The buyouts.
Buyout.
Oh, the managed retreat. Okay, I got thrown off by the dam removal here. I'm looking at that one. In the managed retreat, again, it's another heavy lift. Is there some residential properties in the area that of course we're concerned with and some of them have been removed and previously, like on Pleasant Street in the area by Sturtevant, and that's been great. That's added some capacity there for flooding. However, a lot of it is commercial property that again, that makes it hard when we're dealing with the commercial property owners. And I think what was listed about trying to find relocations here in the city is super important. We want to keep that tax base here. So there is some spaces in the Norwich Town area that are available that we could work with them and our numbers. But again, it's money. I think it's going for those grants and making sure we have the money to get it done. And the capacity with staffing to manage the grants to be able to do it, because it sounds like it's definitely a city managed program with those grants for relocation. So But all three concepts are great. I was still a little distracted over here about widening the bridge spans and doing that, and I think that, you know, they talked about that at 1.2 under, the Route 2 area, and I don't know how much further that got, but that was an interesting concept as well. Thank you for all your hard work. You've done a great job.
The bridge on the London Turnpike is already scheduled to be replaced. So the opportunity, if widening is something that can be engineered, it should be happening with it. Our former Public Works Director, Pat McLaughlin, worked moving that forward, and Brian Long's very much aware of that, but that's already moving forward. Replacement for that bridge, because it was deemed needed.
Do you know what the schedule is?
Not off the top of my head, I'm sorry, Brian's not here.
Brian,
Yeah, definitely talk to Brian about that. That is that work on New London, I think is happening, so, no, that would be.
And we did do some home removals back in the 80s. We did Nutmeg Engineering, which was next to the old Benny's. We removed them, started that process late 2010. Took several years to cobble together all the funding to do that. But that made a lot of sense. I mean, the river used to flow through their back door to the front door at about a 4-foot level. And, you know, it made no sense to keep them there. And then we did find a site for them in Norwich. They're still here. So that part is possible.
yeah, the other thing on the managed retreat that we should mention is that the FEMA map we're using in these renderings is gonna be updated eventually, so it might change the borders of which
Sure.
buildings are in phase 1 and phase 2.
Do we know if you think that they're gonna be more like wider? Do we think it's gonna get a greater flood area than what we're showing now?
Yeah, I mean, we reached out because they updated the hydraulic model for this stretch of the river, which they hadn't done since the 80s. And the USGS was the contractor who did that for FEMA. We reached out 2 years ago, maybe at least a year and a half ago, and they just were not, because it hadn't gone through the public notice process and everything else, the communities hadn't adopted the maps, everything, we weren't able to get access to it. What the person who led the contract with USGS said that in general, the current 500-year floodplain is a good benchmark for where the floodplain was going.
For the 100 years?
Yeah,
basically,
Yeah,
the
but that's very, ambiguous. It might be that, we can't really make decisions based on that information, So, but it's the floodway is probably not gonna get thinner. It's probably gonna get wider if anything, or at least stay where it is,
It's very difficult to regulate on behalf of the state and the federal government on a local level. Dealing with feet on the ground with like the individuals that own homes in these areas or businesses that want to do improvements. And, what kicks in is a substantial improvement and things.
Right.
It's very difficult, and it's a lot of work for communities to do that. And, so somewhat related to this and unrelated is that there needs to be more assistance from the state and the federal government to manage that on a local level. We do a really good job because our staff goes to trainings and does things, and we're a part of the CRS program, which is voluntary, and it takes a lot of time and energy and money. The cost for us to be in it, people don't calculate. We know how much time we put into it. To be one of the, I think only 17 or something in the whole state of Connecticut that's involved in the program, it's very low. So there are, 169 communities plus more little pockets that are eligible. It's very few that participate. So, but even with us having a team that's very, I think, educated on the floodplain, it's still super hard to get that homeowner to understand why we're regulating them and telling them they can't put that addition on or whatever, and things. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult. And you don't feel like you have that much support behind you. You're on this ledge by yourself telling these people they can't do things. So I think taking that next step, which is trying to talk to business owners and things about potentially moving out of the floodplain again, it's kind of, you feel like you're the lone voice and, calling out saying, you should move and we should help you, but you don't feel like everyone wants you to back here, but you're not having that support. Like if it came from higher up that said, these are the ones that we think that they should move instead of us based on the map. It's just hard regulating locally, I guess what the answer is on it, but I do like I like all the concepts. I think the hardest one is the relocation one.
Yeah.
Can I raise one issue
course.
we haven't talked about, and we talked about it prior meetings? Coordinating the level of water in things like Lake Williams, Gardner's Lake, because they all feed into this. Having some mechanism, some alert system that when we know we have these bad weather fronts moving towards us, and if we have these bodies of water that are overflowing, if you even got a couple days notice to be able to start lowering them slower, because you see people do that for maintenance on their, like a Columbia Lake, Amston Lake, they all lower that during the winter time so they can maintain their docks and things, but we could do the same thing to coordinate the amount of water that is then impacted when that overlay, that storm comes in. If we've already reduced to move that water through the system sooner, it's not piling up as much and as high. So I don't think we want to lose sight of that.
Yeah.
I don't know that that actually costs a lot of money.
Mhm.
It's a matter of who's maintaining Lake Williams, who's maintaining Gardner's Lake, and I think that's a 3-town really responsibility, because it sits within 3-town regions, if I recall correctly.
I concur with what the mayor is saying, because, you know, again, we're regulating locally, but the water's coming from the whole watershed. It's coming outside of us, and it's very, you know, so Norwich can be really responsible and do the right thing. But if other people aren't in their communities, we're just getting the fallout of that. You know, similarly, you know, our FEMA flood maps that we've been, I think it was 2016 or 14, our maps are, you know, we've been regulating on the floodway, along the rivers, and doing this for a long time. But if you look at the flood map, it stops at the town border. If you're looking at the banks,
Yep.
it literally stops at the town line. And so everybody south of us isn't regulating along the thing.
Nope.
So I'm like, how are they getting all this development along the things when we're not? We're telling people on Shipping Street, we can't redevelop this area because it's so hard, and the things that we're doing to try to make it work. It's very, there's somewhat of an unfairness, you know, and it's partly because of the maps, just the timing of them. But it's been years that they have not had updated maps. And so here's Norwich doing the right thing and making sure, like, again, being the ones that's sticking our neck out, saying no, being us saying no, and just go across the border. And they get a yes, because their FEMA maps, if they don't show the floodway and they're not showing this, you know, the answer I've received from the state is, well, they should be still regulating even though it's not on the maps. Well, you all know that if it's not on the maps, it's not real as far as, you know, regulatory for us to do. So they're not. So they've, you know, so we're in some ways probably in, believe it or not, in a better situation with what we've regulated than some of the communities south of us on the river that have not dealt with this because they didn't have it on the maps, the floodways that we have. So
They stopped at the Montville Town Line. Just shut down the whole process.
study went right there.
Not, maybe it was lack of money, I don't know. They just
Probably
didn't
was.
continue.
Budget issue and population.
More than likely.
But
Yeah.
for regulatory, it's frustrating because we're doing all this regulating here and south of us isn't, and I don't know about north of us, I just, you know, making that comment, but it's been really helpful having this whole project to see what we can do, and we're, again, we really wanna, you know, put Norwich on the on the forefront of, you know, helping with mitigating floods, you know, risk. We have 3 rivers here, but everyone upgrading of us and other communities need to be doing it as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we've discussed the need for like a watershed management plan.
Didn't they say you can't do that?
So
Because you weren't gonna share their maps with us or some kind of.
so weird. So we can't, the last watershed plan for the Yantic River watershed, right? That it was dated to 1975. So it's obviously it's needs an update, because the solutions that they advanced at that time are also very different than what would be suggested now, right? I mean, they're talking about building new dams, and like a couple of us were at the tour of the Mansfield Hollow Dam recently, and we asked them, you know, are you guys basically in the business of building any more flood control dams? And they said no, that's not an approach that's taken anymore.
In hardscapes and things like that,
Right.
you know, putting these flood walls, like
Right.
one of the, you know,
Might be
drawings,
able to
they're not doing that.
Improve one that's there, but it's very hard to build a new
Yeah.
flood control structure.
So we do think we should take a look at the watershed comprehensively. We just need to find find that funding source to do it. And, in the meantime, we just wanted to make sure the projects that came out of this process really address those most high-risk areas. But we definitely we don't want to lose sight of that, because we know we also have willing partners up north. Yeah.
Glenn's not here, but I
Yeah.
know if he was here, he would advocate for dredging of Fitchville Pond.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
has altered everything over there.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah,
some of the
Some increased storage.
soil issues that were, Kathy's trying to work to get them hooked into a sewer treatment plant. Because that whole little village over there, it's, I don't know what the technical term is, doesn't work well anymore. As far as, that form of,
Septic.
yeah,
Like
it's just,
Like Nutmeg coming down, I mean, that was great, and they had funding to do that, but I'm curious, I wasn't here at the time when that was flooding, is like, how much difference did that make? I mean, I'm glad that it came down, but it's like, that area is green space, but it's all grown in, it's got quite a bit of vegetation, and I'm not saying that we should dredge it, I'm just saying it's really, it's got a lot of vegetation, there, and is that, if Nutmeg was still there, would we have had just as much flooding where Domino's was, or was it been worse, or you know what I mean? It's like, I'm not quite sure.
would have piled up more. I can't tell you how many inches.
Yeah,
I mean,
That's what it did.
I would say maybe the rest of the team would have their own sort of perspective on it, but I would say like our conclusion is that there's not gonna be any one thing that
No.
fixes the problem,
It-
but everything helps a
above.
little bit.
yeah,
Yeah,
We do this thing over here, yes, you should look at the watershed, but the watershed is not gonna solve the problem.
Mm.
Of the
It's
dominoes,
the
for
development-
instance.
A lot of it's the development around it, it's just hard to get, it's people's homes, it's people's livelihood, and to get people on board to move somewhere else. Some of these places are successful because they've been there forever, where Dixie Donuts, they flood. But Dixie Donuts, we tried to help them move a couple of times, and it was so expensive for them to relocate, it's almost worth the cleanup, and they're not saying this, but it's almost worth the cleanup for them to stay there, because it's a well-known location and they're successful there, and moving down the road may not be as advantageous for them, so I don't know, so that's what you kind of see, and every time someone moves in, wants to move in that shopping center where there's a Subways, and then you're like, hold on, a success story is getting the brick and basil out of that trailer into that, into that building. Granted, the building's still in the flood house, but it's raised up. The elevation of that building is raised up. And it took so much convincing and pressure on him of, you're not allowed to stay here, you can't do this, it's supposed to be a temporary structure, to really force, almost from a violation standpoint, and really going after him zoning wise, to really force his hand. And I just saw John at the Italian Festival the other day, and he's like, they're booming, they're huge there, it's doing so great. I'm like, we should have done this years ago. And I'm like, of course you should have done this years ago.
But
But
testimonial on that.
it is, but it costs a lot,
Mm.
going from a food truck to buying a building, it's a
Sure.
huge jump, And, but that was a success, that was a really big success of getting that, I'm proud of that. But it was like very frustrating doing it, we felt alone, like again, we're doing this regulatory thing and just like hammering someone, because we know it's good for them, and it's the right thing, and you're so happy with the successful, but it took a lot of aggravation trying to get that done. But,
food's exceptional.
so, and he's so happy, he's making so much more money because he's not in the food truck, it's like so great for him. But anyways, but that again, it's that livelihood thing, and that not visioning, like, I can't live in my home anymore, and then taking them down. People are sad when they lose fixtures, even if it's just something that's not necessarily historically important, but it's just part of their community that, oh, they're gone now, and it's just, if you were driving down Town Street and the Dixie Donut shop was all gone, and, Leon's, whatever, that area was gone, or the car lot. People are so used to it being there, it would just feel like, oh, we lost everything, even though it's the right thing. Do you know what I'm trying to say? It's
Yeah.
like, it's
Yeah.
the right
Oh,
thing.
yeah. I think sometimes conversation like this, it can come off so clinical, like you're in the floodplain or you're not, and so you have to move or you don't, but it is because we don't kind of have this culture, I think, built up around this process, like
Yeah.
there is kind of a little bit of a grieving, and it's,
There is.
Yeah, I know.
There is,
Yeah.
but that heavy-handedness.
Yeah.
if the government, I'm talking about higher, but really wants to solve this, there needs to be a heavy arm, from them of the hammer coming down. Because they don't understand it from us, like, look at Katrina, like, we're still talking about, Katrina up all these years, it's like, we have that issue, not to that extent, but I'm trying to say is like, people aren't gonna do anything and something super bad happens, and then they wanna rebuild, they still wanna rebuild where they were at.
I really like your, the example you shared of, because I think it shifts the focus on, instead of don't do this, it's here's what you can gain from doing this. And it's that positive shift of living with peace of mind, living without, constantly being worried with the next flash flood. Oh, is this going to wipe me out again? So I think that shift in mindset can be really powerful as well.
And someone if John would be willing to talk about that on, how it affected him when that flood happened, we were already in the discussions with him of getting out of there. Since I started, in 2016, it was like, what's going on here? Why is this here? Well, it was a temporary thing. He was supposed to be there, no more than 3 months or whatever it is, 180 days or something, I forget. And that wasn't how it was. It was literally, gazebos are going there. It's permanent structures, building fire pit, fire things. And it was like, this isn't going anywhere. This is like bad. And it took a lot of forcefulness and unnecessary badgering, like enforcement and that kind of thing. Then when he finally happened, then the success is someone like John to say, hey, I was so reluctant, and what positive thing, hearing that, because I think other businesses need to hear that from someone who took that jump, because they just don't see, they don't get to see someone that really has done that, and moved, and relocated. And like for him, it was next door. It just happened just to be able to go from here to here made a huge difference. Is it still flood hazard? Yes, but at least he's elevated and this is at fixtures, and it's a lot less, damage that could happen to him than losing his whole business.
I think the state's starting to send signals now with the new climate bill passing, saying, okay, now when you want to sell this flood prone house, you're gonna have to disclose that flood risk with your partners.
Yes.
That's gonna make it harder to sell your house or business, and it might reduce the price of it. Whereas if you started investing now for moving, say 2-3 years from now.
But it's too bad the state didn't have money behind them to say, you have to disclose it, and it's like, well, no one's gonna wanna buy my house with this amount of money, but there's money to buy you out. So it's kind of like, at least you get this instead, because, who wants to buy that if you know that it's a flood risk house? People are buying it if it's on the shoreline, because they'll take that risk for multi-millions of dollars if we have this beautiful view, but not an inexpensive, home that happens to be in the floodplain. A lot of people say, I don't know, they didn't come in and look at the maps, and all of a sudden, or they bought it for cash. There's a lot of investors from out of state that buy in the city of Norwich and pay cash, and they don't get a mortgage, so they're not asking those questions. And they're very ignorant in the sense of not knowing that they just bought a flood prone property. But good job.
I haven't talked about this, but there's actually technically a fourth river in Norwich, and it's the Spalding Brook that comes down out of Mohegan Park. There's a 12-foot cul-de-sac underground that comes in along the old mills on Chestnut Street. And we had significant flooding there during some very heavy rain, 5 years ago now, when a Sean event was still in the old Bulletin building. He had 4.5 feet of water in his basement, and came from under the ground and came back up. It was almost a reverse of the design for everything to flow out to the river. It was the opposite. There was so much water coming down, it bubbled up through all the grade, came down through the stairs. That still exists. That's still an issue. That's why part of downtown is a floodway, because when the dam broke in '63, it was millions of dollars of damage. People were killed. I was a child living in the neighborhood around it. I remember hearing the roar during the night. I was literally down Broad Street, and it came right through that area at the other end. But that is still something contributing to the Yantic, because it comes into the harbor. We probably shouldn't lose sight of that. We've talked about what we could do, which even includes Putting the pond back at Lake Street, that was a pond, but it was filled in for play. Burying the brook itself created issues, capping it along its whole course. But it's still there and it still leaves that impression. The right kind of storm, the right intensity, someone's paying a bill. And that happened to him and other people in the old building there, the corner of Bath Street downtown. It should be mentioned. That's why I brought
That's
it
like
up.
Flood risk that's not gonna show up on the flood map.
Well, you know, it does, actually shows up, it's a floodway, it does show us the
Yeah.
floodway,
Doesn't-
and we asked them to
Yeah.
restudy that area. And they are actually narrowing down some of it, because where it is piped, not closer
Mhm.
to up by Chestnut Street. It comes down Chestnut Street in that area, and they're actually going to do the center line of the, kind of the center line of the road of where the floodway is. Because right now it touches like the Chestnut Street mill, but that's not really where the.
Really
whole
not
thing is.
in.
It's piped underground. So they've studied that, a special project for the city.
Yeah.
And we're expecting the maps to show that that's reduced actually in certain areas there. But as it gets closer to downtown where the Norwich, on Franklin Street and stuff under there, the old Norwich, Bulletin building, that does flood underneath. Like I said, there's not really supposed to be storage in that basement or anything like that. So, but certain areas they are narrowing, actually, they're gonna make the floodway smaller, you know, from that, but. Because they studied how big, we have some information about. the
And that
pipe size.
impacts development of vacant buildings because if they're not historic, you can only improve 50% value in a given year, which means how do you ever fix the building? You're not gonna fix it halfway. You're gonna fix it, you're gonna fix it, but you're not allowed to. So you have to, was it 208? You gotta raise the ground level floor 1.5 feet up, which means you have to go underneath into the basement to begin that work. Just can't raise the floor. Those kinds of issues are still real, holding development back.
So the city has been lucky to be able to take advantage of the historic exemption, because we have so many historic structures in the city and we have, been very generous with using that if it's on the National Register or the State Register. Because there's that balance, there really is a balance of flood hazard area and also allowing for reuse of historic buildings that you need to, but we don't blindly do it, just to put that on the record, like, you know, if someone's gonna do work or, you know, and do more a substantial improvement and doesn't have to, you know, meet that 50%, we still have the utilities moved up, we have lots of things taken care of. So all our officials are on board with basically saying, hey, you still need to do some code things to do the best, you know, do some flood vents if we can get them to do that without changing the architecture of the building. So, you know, like I said, we're lucky here in the city that we've done a lot of training with our building officials and assistant building officials and zoning to kind of, you know, be a leader as far as special flood. But it's hard dealing with it locally, you know, it just, you know.
That's another layer of
It is.
building requirements that
Mhm.
just add to the. How is the owner gonna get a return on investment?
Mhm.
The old River's Edge was the edge of Water Street in downtown Norwich, where the Chelsea Landing is. You come out the doors on the side and you could get in a little rowboat and take off. That
So
was
we're
where the
drained
river
for it.
was.
That's the water went up the stream.
It was all filled in and, you know, bad decisions, Holyoke Island's all filled in. Just bad things were done in the 1800s.
Because they could,
Well, there was nobody,
Yeah.
it wasn't
No.
illegal, right?
no, but
I mean, all Boston was filled in
Yeah,
the
so-
1800s.
Right.
It was a swamp.
that's what the Norwich Town Mall was. I can still see the tall reed grass. You go to BB Dairy on the edge there. There was no mall, there was no roads, no bridge, it was just open waterway. And that was a watershed when the Yantic reared its head, water could be stored there. They filled all that in, I guess, what, in the 60s?
So I guess my question would be, we have a grant application that we're working on, and I think you want to speak a little bit about that, because I know Matt is here for the newspaper, I'm sure you would like to hear what the next steps are.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So for all of these projects, you know, so we've kind of come to like I would say like a mini conclusion right now, in the sense that at least we know what to go after next. We, you know, so while we're not CIRCA's not the state, we are hoping to be at least like one next level up of support for the city and really for all the towns in our region. But now, I think we're just kind of trying to gather backing up and up. And then working with, partners at CIRCA, everyone is kind of pulling in the same direction. We are we're hoping to apply for an OPA FEMA grant round. Right now, we have to meet with the state and just make sure that the project meets all the eligibility requirements. But, we've already advanced the application pretty far for the removal of the Upper Falls Dam, at least the design and engineering phase of that work. So that's kind of the next bite we're hoping to take off of all this work. Once we have a design plan for the Upper Falls Dam, there's a lot more, I think, projects and appetite for construction. Everyone wants a construction-ready project, or a lot of funders want that to be the focus, but we have to bridge this design and engineering gap. But we're going after that. We're working on that grant. And we also have another grant possibility that we're thinking of for the Norwich Town Commons area that's a little more economic development focused, that we're going to be pursuing, which is open now. It's another federal grant through the Economic Development Administration. We think it's a good fit because of the economic development piece, and obviously the Norwich Town Commons area is very tied to that. So that's something that we like to explore more, but we really, we don't want the burden to fall, but like the mayor said, there's so many things to fund, like this can't all fall on the city. We need to look for these other opportunities, and kind of that's what we're going to do. I know at the COG, we're committed to that. When I showed that image before of the flood risk areas in the region and that dot, I mean, this really is right now like our biggest inland floodland risk area. So it's something that's very much on our radar. Our offices are right above the Yantic, we're very tied to that part of town. And so, yeah, we're just going to keep kind of driving the bus toward these funding opportunities the best we can, being the best partner to the city that we can be, trying to share that
Appreciate
food
it.
and,
Very much.
yeah,
Olivia.
I mean, yeah. Yeah, so funding is the next step. Must find funding is the next step for all of
Things
this.
that you brought up though about getting these lakes to coordinate, be part of a regional solution. I think you could do that as part of an emergency preparedness plan, create some kind of ad hoc.
We need a
regional
MOU
memorandum of
among all the
understanding.
towns, there's over sitting there.
Whoever the
This-
emergency
right.
planners are for those towns, and say, hey,
Yep.
we know a big storm's coming and it's gonna be affected by these lake levels that you're gonna be letting water go. We just wanna know, right? We wanna be able to say, hey, can you let some water out? Cause we could use all the storage we can get.
Right.
The other part of climate change is you get droughts too, so we just have
True.
to manage both risks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, previously to this position, I was involved in a lake complex in Mass where they had a very well-defined system for, like, when the water level hit a certain threshold, everyone knew, okay, it's time to lower the dam, there was this difficulties there because there was also water supply and lots of things are involved, but you can definitely set up a system like that. You just have to build that network and be committed. Well,
How far does the Yantic go? Like how far, outside of McNamara goes like the Baltic, like where does the Yantic start?
in Lebanon,
Okay.
in Savin Lake, I believe it's Pond, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's
So the
kind of,
Yantic starts off sometime.
Hmm.
Versus 11.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
kind of like southwest. Yeah.
And Shetucket does not have the same kind of flooding issues because of the depth of the Shetucket and the way the banks are. Is that why the Shetucket does not have the flooding issues of the Yantic?
I think it's the Mansfield holiday. I think it's, isn't
How
it?
come you have issues?
Yeah.
in Chautauqua?
About Sprague and Baltic had floods.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's that same
What
corridor.
portion of Shetucket that we don't have, the concerns as much, and our flood hazard areas don't extend into those properties from the edge of the
No,
river as much.
There,
so,
it's the elevations there.
Different topography.
Yeah.
Upstream
Yeah.
infrastructure.
And it is, you
Yeah.
are downstream of the flood control
Yeah.
dam in Mansfield Hollow.
Yeah.
That's in the
It
water.
goes all the way down to the impact of that is felt all the way down.
You got the Quinnebog off of that too.
Mhm.
So that controls it for us better, you're saying.
Well, it may add to
Maybe,
it.
yeah, I don't know. But I think we focused on this partly because it was like the area that got impacted so much in
Yeah.
2024.
No,
It
it
was
makes
kind of
sense.
like,
Yeah,
you know, let's get some projects.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what I think why we ended up where we ended up. It was like, can we get some projects that can actually get done? This is what we came up with, that in the relative near term could actually get done.
but like we talked before, I know when we looked on the screen and we really focused on like where the mall is, you know, where the Stop and Shop in that area. But again, going back to what I was saying earlier, you know, we still have the same issues really down in the Yantic area. That's, you know, where Dixie Donuts is and all that down there, and that's, you know, they have the same issues. It's just that, you know, obviously we have to pick on an area, and I think we prioritize that area where Domino's is and because they were really impacted. We saw you know, a lot of articles and things about them. But
You also have the Shoals Avenue where the Friendlies is. The thing that divided that impact was the highway. Large highway going through. Before that was just all one impacted area. Up until you get to Bean Hill, where then elevations rise enough so that you don't see it. And then it goes back down again and then you see it.
there's a lot of blame.
Yeah.
I mean, moving that substation, you know, you don't
Yeah,
have to
that's
turn
a big one.
5,000 customers off, and that's what we had to do.
Yeah.
Shut them out for what, a week
And
or so?
we started, there was a lot of talk about Fitchville, but that's gonna continue to be an issue, you know?
No, I know.
Just because, like, when we talked about the floodway and the actual like physical risk to people from a flash flood. You know, if the dam were to just fail.
And there's so many homes in that area,
Yeah.
isn't there? So like, that's a really, you know, where we're talking, this is residential, but it's really not the residential as much as our commercial impact in this area that we've talked about studying. But like in Pittsfield, there's all those houses around the campsites and, you know, that is right there, you know? So, you know, again, you know, we're Norwich centric because you work for the city of Norwich and the mayor of the city, but, you know, we're not blind to what's happening around the communities around us and how they impact us, but also because we care about the other communities in our region, you know, and we don't want to see them struggle on the same river that we have issues with, you know, so hopefully they will move forward with some additional work in their own community too.
Yeah. They'll either repair it or remove it,
Yeah.
you know, that's basically the
Those
options.
things seem so easy, like, I'm just, I mean, from a, like,
It's not.
not a technical side, not technical, but like, you know, the whole push it over with your foot, you know what I'm trying to say, it's like, it's kind of falling apart, you know, can't you just stop the river for a little while, go in there, remove it, and just like, oh, like in the olden days, you know what I'm trying to say, like, that's how you would remove you know, a dam, you would just remove a dam,
Yeah.
you know, I know it's not that way anymore, just saying, you know.
I don't see
Right
that
now,
coming down. I
Massachusetts
really
has a
don't.
request for proposal out to the municipalities
Yeah.
to nominate the dams that they want to have decommissioned. That's
Oh,
the
okay.
first step.
Yeah.
And they'll go and put out an RFP for the engineers to go study it.
Yeah.
And figure out, and it be done safely.
Okay.
And then they go to the next level and say, oh.
Well, I
now
get it, I know
finish.
it's technical, but I'm just saying that
But I
in
mean,
the
that's
olden
the
days, I
state.
think they would have
I'm
just
saying-
like went into the river and removed the dam.
But
Yeah.
that's the state. of Massachusetts.
one.
So the state of
big
Connecticut
one.
could try to do the same thing, because they're having to manage all this
I know.
risk as a regulator.
Yeah,
And it would be good to be knocking some of this risk down
yeah,
over the years, because Connecticut has way too many dams
yes.
for the size state it is.
Mhm.
So if they don't start
4,000
taking
plus.
some of them out, they'll never catch up.
Most are privately owned.
I forgot what state it
Well,
was,
there's a
but
lot that the state owns too, though.
there was a great article that just came out like a couple weeks ago, and I forget where it was, and Native Americans had like a bunch of them, 100 people or something, I'm just throwing out some numbers. They all like rode down this whole length that has been locked with dams for so long, and you know, in this state, there was like hundreds of miles that they were able to then be able to traverse, that the peoples hadn't been able to do that, and indigenous peoples, they were able to go back and travel along this river for all this length that had been blocked for so long, and that was kind of cool, you know. You know, open it up, let it flow.
Can't get electricity out of it, and you can't get safety out of it, it shouldn't be there. It's not really gonna have a public benefit. It's the whole technology thing.
Well, we might be coming to the end of the discussion here, but we wanted just to thank everyone, the project steering committee members of the public that came out to the first public meeting that we had as well, and have been talking to us throughout the process, the great project team we had here. And then, we're gonna kind of keep hoping to move these projects forward. And we have this website, bit.ly/resilient Yantic River. We're gonna keep that updated. We'll put the recording of this presentation up there. And then, yeah, we'll definitely kind of hope to stay in touch with the press, through social media, just all the ways that we can continue to keep people updated about how these projects progress over time when we do kind of meet those milestones of securing more funding. And then please, this is my email, reach out to me at any time if you have particular questions about the Yantic. If I can't answer them, I'll pass them along to people who can at the city or otherwise. But yeah, we hope to continue to be a resource here, and really try to move this work along. Thanks,
Good
everyone.
job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Huzzah.